Snowflakes drifted silently from the blackened sky, settling gently on rooftops and treetops, like scattered pieces of time itself. In the small town of Silver Ridge, New Hampshire, houses flickered with golden light, music echoed from open windows, and laughter rang like bells down the winding streets. It was New Year's Eve 2005, a night of celebration, of countdowns and resolutions. But not for Evan Marlowe. 12 years old with bright hazel eyes and a mop of unkempt brown hair, Evan darted through the snow-covered forest on the outskirts of town. His breath puffed out in small clouds, and his gloved hand clutched an old brass pocket watch, its face cracked but ticking steadily. The chain was looped around his wrist, swaying with each step. His heart pounded, not from fear but anticipation. The townsfolk knew Evan as the clock boy. He was fascinated by mechanisms, could dismantle a watch in minutes and reassemble it faster than most could blink. His grandfather, who had passed just a month prior, had left him that pocket watch, an antique from the 1800s, engraved with strange symbols Evan had never seen before. That night, something had drawn him out of the house and into the woods. The watch had started ticking louder than ever. Evan swore he'd heard it whisper, a hum in the gears, a pull in his chest. Back in the town square, parents toasted champagne. Fireworks stood ready for ignition. The mayor adjusted his hat at the podium, counting down the final minutes. Evan's mother, Meredith, scanned the crowd with growing concern, her son nowhere in sight. "Have you seen Evan?" she asked a neighbor. "Last I saw, he was by the cider booth," the woman replied, but her expression faltered. "That was over an hour ago." Meredith's stomach sank. In the woods, Evan stopped running. He reached a clearing marked by an ancient, ivy-wrapped stone pillar, something he'd never seen before, not even in all his wandering explorations. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. The watch in his hand ticked faster. He opened it. Midnight was near. Evan pressed his thumb to the center of the face where a symbol glowed softly. The gears inside began to spin backwards. Behind him, wind howled suddenly through the trees. Snow kicked up around him, blinding him for a moment. He shielded his eyes and heard a low hum, deep, metallic, not from this world. Then everything stopped. No wind, no snow, silence, and Evan Marlowe was gone. If stories like this captivate your imagination, don't forget to hit that subscribe button now to stay tuned for more chilling, unforgettable tales. You won't want to miss what happens next. 10 seconds past midnight, the fireworks erupted over Silver Ridge. Cheers echoed, couples kissed, children clapped. But one voice cried out sharply through the noise. "Evan!" Meredith screamed, her eyes scanning the thinning crowd. Panic rising. By 1 a.m., the festivities had ended. By 2, the police had been called. Detective Lena Voss arrived at 2:37 a.m., her car skidding slightly on the icy road as she pulled up near the Marlowe home. With sharp eyes and a stiff coat buttoned to the neck, she surveyed the scene quickly. Boy, 12. Vanished during the countdown, the officer briefed her. Parents last saw him around 10. No signs of struggle. We're starting a search. Voss nodded, her mind already racing. She'd worked enough missing child cases to know that time was their greatest enemy, and this one felt strange. At dawn, the search party reached the edge of the woods. They followed tracks, small child-sized footprints pressed into fresh snow. They led deep into the forest, through twists and trails. Then they stopped. No sign of return, no other prints, just gone. They combed the area for hours. Dogs sniffed the perimeter. Volunteers called Evan's name until their voices cracked, but the woods offered no answers. What disturbed Voss most was what they didn't find. No dropped glove, no broken branch, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the boy had walked into the forest and vanished into air. And the watch? Nowhere. By the end of the day, Silver Ridge had changed. Whispers traveled faster than facts. He ran away. He was taken. Something in the woods. Speculation grew like frost. But in the quiet corners of the town, some spoke of time folding in on itself, of the old watchmakers, of the clock tower that had stopped ticking for the first time in decades, at exactly midnight. And in her office, Voss sat staring at a photo of Evan. His eyes sparkled with curiosity, intelligence, wonder. She wouldn't let this one go. She couldn't. Not after what she had seen. Detective Lena Voss stood at the edge of the woods as the early morning sun cast long, pale shadows over the frostbitten trees. Search crews were still combing the area, but deep down, she already knew. Evan Marlowe wasn't here, not in any conventional sense. The boy had vanished without a trace. Back in town, the Marlowe house was wrapped in a chilling quiet. Meredith sat motionless on the living room couch, eyes fixed on the window, hoping to see her son come running up the path. Her husband, Grant, paced endlessly, fists clenched, mumbling theories that fell apart as soon as he spoke them. He wouldn't run away, he said for the 5th time. He was happy, excited for midnight, for his projects. Lena had heard it all before. Every parent wants to believe their child wouldn't just disappear, but Evan's case already defied logic. Rumors moved faster than fact. The first theory, Evan had wandered off and gotten lost, but no body was found, no signs of distress, no broken branches or clothing scraps. The second theory, an abduction. Yet there were no tire marks, no witnesses, no one suspicious in town, not even a sound. Then came the whispers. "Maybe he never meant to come back," muttered an elderly woman near the bakery. "Maybe something took him," another replied. "Out there in the woods." Silver Ridge wasn't used to darkness. It was a town of safety, tradition, and quiet winters. But now every parent held their children tighter. Doors were locked earlier, lights stayed on longer. For Lena, the case became an obsession. She interviewed dozens, Evan's friends, his teachers, even the town librarian. All described Evan the same way, bright, inquisitive, maybe a little peculiar, always scribbling notes in a leather journal or tinkering with gears. He was fascinated by time, his science teacher recalled, clocks, calendars, astronomy. Always asking questions about how the world moves forward, Lena asked about the watch. "The old one?" "Yeah, he carried it everywhere," one classmate said. "Said it was special, like it could do things." By the end of the second week, search efforts began to shrink. Volunteers returned to work. Reporters packed up their vans. The case, lacking evidence or leads, was quietly labeled as unsolved. But Lena couldn't let it go. In her office, she pored over files, maps, timelines, sketches. She traced Evan's last known path 100 times. Each detail felt like a puzzle piece from the wrong box. Only one object remained missing: the watch. It haunted her. Winter deepened. Snow thickened. Months passed, and Evan's name began to fade from headlines. The town moved on cautiously, with scars buried beneath polite smiles. Yet Lena felt it every time she walked through the square or saw the schoolyard. He was still missing. A year later, she visited the Marlowes on New Year's Eve. Meredith had aged 10 years. The tree in the living room stood undecorated. No music played, no countdown. "We didn't want to celebrate," Grant said softly. "Not with an empty chair." Lena stayed silent. She'd heard similar words before from other families in other cases, but this time she felt it too deeply. There was something unresolved, something she had missed. In her darkest moments, she remembered the night she first stood at the forest's edge, how the trees seemed too still, the silence too heavy. And the watchtower in town, once perfectly synchronized, had frozen that night at midnight. Even after repairs, it never ticked quite right again. Years turned to 3, then 5, then 10. Lena aged, took on other cases, solved many. But Evan's file stayed open on her desk, updated every year on December 31st with a simple line: "No new developments." She kept the boy's photo in her drawer. Sometimes she stared at it, trying to imagine what he might look like now. Older, taller, smarter certainly. By year 15, she was the only one still asking questions. And by year 19, the town barely mentioned the Marlowes at all. But the woods never forgot, and neither did she. On the 20th anniversary, Lena sat alone in her modest home, a single candle burning beside Evan's case file. Midnight was approaching. Snow fell softly outside. She hadn't told anyone, but she'd requested one last favor from the department: to monitor the frequency tied to a piece of missing property, an antique pocket watch. Not because she expected anything, but because some things you never let go. Not when they vanish without a trace, not when time itself seemed to stop. The snow fell with the same silence it had 2 decades ago. In Silver Ridge, the world seemed frozen in more ways than one. New houses had been built, new families had arrived, but the heart of the town, the old clock tower, the narrow streets, the lingering winter air, remained unchanged. And so did the wound that never fully healed. It was December 31st, 2025. Lena Voss, now retired, sat in her study beside a flickering fireplace, a mug of tea cooling at her elbow. Her hair had silvered, her hands bore the faint tremble of age, but her mind remained sharp, honed by decades of patterns, puzzles, and unsolved truths. She wasn't supposed to be thinking about Evan Marlowe tonight. 20 years was a long time, long enough for closure, most would say, but the case had never offered that luxury. No body, no witness, no ending. She stared at the watch report again, a digital file sent as a courtesy from a young technician who still respected her name. At exactly 12:01 a.m., midnight on the dot, a dormant frequency activated in the department's archive, registered to a missing object coded as evidence item M047, Evan Marlowe's pocket watch. Lena read the data 3 times. The ping was real. Location: the old clock tower, a place long retired, sealed for maintenance and deemed unsafe years ago. She grabbed her coat. Silver Ridge's streets were quiet. The town had gathered in the square again, though the festivities were tamer now. Smaller crowds, fewer fireworks. Lena walked past them unseen, a ghost among familiar faces. Her steps crunched softly over snow as she moved toward the tower that had haunted her dreams. The entrance was chained, but rusted. She broke the lock without hesitation and slipped inside. Dust danced in the moonlight. Gears long dormant hung above like skeletal remains. The silence here felt thicker, not empty but expectant. She climbed. Each step creaked. The air grew colder, though there was no wind. At the top, the old mechanical heart of the tower lay in disrepair, but one object stood out. Resting precisely in the center of the gear table, where no one should have been able to reach, was the watch, unharmed. Its face glowed faintly, ticking. 12 o'clock and counting. Lena's breath caught. She reached for it, hesitated, then picked it up. It was warm to the touch, too warm. She turned it over in her palm. The engraving on the back, faded with time, now looked newly etched. The symbol at its center pulsed like a heartbeat. She sat there, holding it, for a long while. The town bells rang in the distance. Cheers below, another year begun, but something had shifted. This wasn't just a returned item, it was a message. The next day, Lena met with Deputy Alan Rhodes, a former recruit who had once shadowed her in the field. He was skeptical but respectful. "You're saying the watch just appeared?" he asked, peering at the report. "I'm saying it wasn't there before midnight, and now it is. That's not coincidence." He scratched his beard. "You think someone returned it?" "No." Lena's voice was steady. "I think it was never really gone." She requested surveillance footage from the town square, focusing on the hours before and after midnight. Nothing unusual at first. Families, laughter, drinks raised in toasts. But then something strange. At exactly 12:15, the video glitched. A single second skipped. When it resumed, several people seemed momentarily disoriented, turning, looking around. No one could explain why. A town-wide skip in time. It lasted less than a heartbeat. But it happened. Later that afternoon, Lena returned to the woods, walking the same trail Evan had taken 20 years ago. The snow was deep, the trees older, but she found the clearing, the same one detailed in her case notes. The stone pillar was still there, cloaked in ice and vines, as forgotten as the story itself. She brushed off the frost and found the same faint symbols she'd once dismissed as decoration. Now they matched the watch. Standing in that clearing, Lena realized something impossible. Whatever had taken Evan, it wasn't finished. And now, it had opened the door again. Lena didn't sleep that night. The pocket watch sat on her desk, ticking steadily, unaffected by time or reason. Its rhythmic beat seemed to echo louder in the stillness, as if calling for attention. She studied it again under a magnifier. No damage, no dirt, no aging. It looked preserved, like it had never left. She pulled out her old case files, the ones she had refused to archive, and laid out the notes. Evan's drawings, sketches of the watch, diagrams of impossible mechanical structures. At the time, she had dismissed them as imaginative distractions from a curious mind. Now they looked more like blueprints. There was one name in the margin of a sketchbook page, Nathaniel Crane. She remembered him. Evan's mentor, a retired horologist who had run a tiny clock shop off Main Street, closed shortly after Evan vanished. Some said grief drove him away. Others whispered darker things. Lena started making calls. By noon, she had a location. Nathaniel had moved into a secluded cottage on the outskirts of town, well beyond the lake where few bothered to go. She drove there in silence, heart tightening as the landscape grew wilder, the trees taller. The man who opened the door was aged but alert, with piercing grey eyes and hands that twitched even while still. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. "You know why I'm here." Nathaniel nodded and stepped aside. The inside of his home was more machine than living space. Gears lined the walls, pendulums swung without rhythm, blueprints, equations, journals covered every surface, and in the center, a long table with a glass dome, under which sat an identical watch. Not similar. Identical. Lena froze. "You made more than one?" "I made the first," he said. "The one Evan carried was something else." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" He walked to the glass dome and lifted it. The original was designed to track anomalies, fractures in local time fields. Harmless curiosities, I thought. But Evan took it further. He built a resonance core inside it, something I couldn't even comprehend. And then, the watch began to respond. To what? Nathaniel looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear. To something beneath us. A pocket of time. Something ancient. Alive. Lena felt the weight of his words settle like snow on her shoulders. "And you never told anyone?" "They would have thought me mad. I nearly did. But when Evan vanished, I knew." She pulled the recovered watch from her coat. His eyes widened. "It's back," he whispered. "It chose to return." Lena set it on the table. "Why now?" Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began rummaging through a box of tools and pulled out a strange device, part compass, part radar. He pointed it at the watch. The needle spun wildly, then locked. "It's active." "What does that mean?" He met her gaze. "It's calling again." Back in town, Lena returned to her study, mind racing. She began cross-referencing Evan's notes with the strange symbol on the watch. After hours of digging through obscure engineering texts and esoteric journals, a pattern emerged. The symbols weren't just decorative, they were coordinates, not of space, but of moments. Events locked in time. She mapped them out. December 31st, 2005. Then December 31st, 2025. Every 20 years the signal recurs. A cycle. She pulled out a photo of Evan, stared at his young face. Something told her that he hadn't just vanished. He had been taken, or gone willingly, but into something beyond their understanding. And now the passage had opened again. The watch ticked louder. Just before midnight, Lena returned to the tower. The gears still lay dormant, dust layered thick. But something had changed. The watch in her pocket buzzed, not mechanically, but with a pulse. She held it close to the tower's gear wall, and one by one old components clicked into motion. Not all, just a few. Enough to show life remained in the bones of the structure. As the mechanism stirred, she felt it, a subtle shift in pressure. The air bent just slightly like a held breath, and then it was gone. But the message was clear. Time had stirred again. The morning after the clock tower stirred back to life, the town awoke to a strange unease, one that couldn't be named or reasoned with. It was in the air, thick and humming, as if time itself had hiccuped. Most residents brushed it off as nerves or déjà vu. Lena Voss didn't. She arrived at the tower just after sunrise, watch in hand. The gear wall had stopped again, frozen mid-motion like a snapshot of something trying to breathe. The cold air seemed to push against her skin with an unseen pressure. Then came a noise, not mechanical, not natural. A soft chime, not from the watch, from outside. She hurried down the tower steps and emerged into the morning frost, and saw him, a man barefoot, standing at the edge of the woods, clothes torn, hair wet with dew, pale as if drawn from another world. He didn't move as she approached, didn't flinch when she raised her voice. "What's your name?" He blinked slowly, lips parting. "Evan," he whispered. Lena stared, pulse hammering. It couldn't be. She looked closer. The face was younger than it should have been, far too young. The same wide eyes, the same jawline, a scar on his chin from a childhood fall. Her mind reeled. "You're Evan Marlowe?" He nodded. "I was there, for a long time, or maybe no time at all." The town buzzed with news of the return. Whispers traveled fast, phones faster. Within hours, authorities had intervened, demanding statements, medical tests, isolation. But Lena had moved quickly. She pulled strings, called in old debts. By the time the government suits arrived, Evan was already in a private facility arranged under her direction, hidden from the public eye. He hadn't said much, but what he did say chilled her. "It wasn't darkness," he said. "It was light. Endless light, and silence that pressed in from all sides." Lena sat across from him in a quiet room, notebook open. "Do you remember what happened?" "I followed the ticking. I thought it would stop when I reached the center, but it never did." "Where were you?" He frowned. "Beneath, but also outside. The place didn't have shape. Not like this." He pressed his palms to the table, trying to ground himself. "They showed me things, machines made of memory, places built from moments. I was part of it, and it was part of me." Lena kept her voice steady. "Who's they?" "I don't know," he said softly. They didn't speak. They echoed. "What brought you back?" His eyes flickered to the watch on her wrist. It called. Again. Tests confirmed what was impossible. DNA matched Evan Marlowe perfectly. Fingerprints, dental records, even a faint scar from a childhood vaccine. But the timeline refused to cooperate. He hadn't aged a day since 2005. Doctors called it a medical impossibility. Some suggested a twin, a hoax. But Lena knew. She had seen the look in his eyes, the same haunted awareness she had only seen in soldiers, survivors. People who had crossed lines others couldn't even imagine. Still, the mystery deepened. Evan couldn't explain how he returned, only that when the watch activated, something opened, a moment between seconds, a path he could take, and he had chosen to come back, not to escape, but to warn. 3 nights later, Lena visited Nathaniel Crane. She brought Evan with her. The old man stared at the boy as if seeing a ghost. His fingers trembled as he reached out, not to touch, but to confirm. "It's really you." Evan nodded, silent. Nathaniel turned to Lena. "They'll come now. The signal was sent. They'll trace it." "Who?" Nathaniel closed his eyes. "Anyone paying attention to the rift?" "Government. Others. They've been watching for decades. We weren't the only ones studying the anomaly." Lena's mind snapped into focus. The watch was no longer a mystery. It was a beacon. And it had just lit up again. The facility where Evan was being kept had thick walls and security systems designed to deter curiosity. But none of it was meant to contain what he carried within him, knowledge that defied every rule Lena Voss had ever followed. She sat across from him again, pen forgotten in hand, as he began to tell her the truth. It started with the clearing. When I pressed the symbol on the watch, he said slowly, it wasn't just sound I heard, it was motion. Something pulling at the seams of things. Like time wasn't just moving forward anymore, it was folding inward. He described falling not physically, but as if the world inverted itself and dragged him through its spine. There had been no pain, just distortion, shapes and colors no eye was meant to see, sound that tasted like copper, air that hummed with memory. I landed in a corridor, Evan continued. It had no walls, but it confined me. No floor, but I stood. Everything was made of gears and pulses, like a machine dreaming of architecture. Lena barely breathed. There was a center, Evan said, a core, a heart. I could feel it beating through the walls. Every time I tried to speak, it showed me images instead. Visions of the town, of you. She frowned. Of me? He nodded. You were always near the edge of something, always questioning. What was the core? He looked down at his hands as if still unsure they were real. I think it was the clock, not ours, theirs, a construct that regulates timelines, like a nervous system for reality. Lena leaned forward. You're saying time isn't linear. I'm saying time is stitched together. And some stitches are weaker than others. Nathaniel Crane confirmed parts of the story with trembling urgency. In the 1960s, he had worked with a classified division under a now-defunct federal program known only as Project Minerva, a group tasked with investigating localized distortions in temporal physics. Silver Ridge had been one of 5 hotspots in the nation. He showed Lena a map covered in red circles and crude annotations. The same stone pillar Evan had found was marked with a symbol matching the one etched on the watch. It's an anchor point, Nathaniel explained, a gate disguised as a monument. Why Silver Ridge? Lena asked. Nathaniel tapped the map. It wasn't chosen. It was built around. The original settlers hadn't just been farmers or traders. They had come here because they'd seen something, events that replayed out of order, days that vanished, children who spoke languages they'd never learned. The town's founders erected the clock tower as a means of grounding the community, keeping time stable, but that stability had frayed. Evan grew more lucid with each passing day, though his sense of time remained fractured. Sometimes I wake up and I'm 12 again, he said. Other times I remember being 50. He sketched diagrams obsessively, layers of interwoven clockwork, spiraling staircases with no entry or exit. Lena took photos, sent them to physicists and engineers she trusted. No one could decipher them. But Nathaniel only nodded. They're schematics, he said, for something we were never meant to fix. Late one night, Evan woke in a cold sweat. It's happening again, he said. I can hear the pulse. What pulse? The convergence. It starts like a whisper, then becomes a rhythm, and when it's loud enough, the walls open. He stood, pacing. I left that place. But I didn't shut the door. The next day, Lena drove him back to the clearing. Evan hesitated before stepping into the frost-ringed circle. The stone pillar loomed like a sentinel. The watch ticked faster in his hand. It remembers, he murmured. He knelt and pressed the watch's back against the symbol. Nothing happened. Then, a breeze, not from the sky, from the ground. The snow swirled, lifting gently, then violently. The air turned dense, heavy with static. The stone glowed faintly. Lena grabbed Evan's arm. We go now. But Evan didn't move. His eyes widened. They're watching. Back in town, Lena met Nathaniel in secret. They're not just gates, she told him. They're systems, and Evan is linked to them now. Nathaniel exhaled sharply. Then the breach is alive, Lena nodded, and waking. Nathaniel Crane's small cottage felt heavier than usual. The air was thick with dust and secrets, the silence filled with the echoes of forgotten clocks. Lena sat across from him, watching as his fingers traced the worn edges of an ancient journal, pages yellowed with age and stained by time. This isn't just about Evan, Nathaniel began, voice low. It's about what we were trying to do decades before he disappeared. Lena nodded, urging him to continue. In the 1960s, I was part of Project Minerva, he said. eyes distant. A government initiative to understand anomalies, places where time didn't behave the way it should. Silver Ridge was a hotspot. We believed these distortions could be harnessed. Why? Lena asked. What was the goal? To control time itself, Nathaniel admitted. To create a device that could stabilize, or even manipulate, local temporal fields. The clock tower wasn't just a monument. It was a mechanism designed to anchor time here. He paused, fingers tightening around the journal. Evan's grandfather was one of us. He left that watch for Evan, hoping he'd finish what we started. Lena felt a chill. So Evan's disappearance wasn't an accident? Nathaniel shook his head. No, he crossed into a rift, into a place where time folds and loops. The watch was his key, but also his tether. But why didn't you warn anyone? Why let this happen? Nathaniel's eyes glistened. Fear and hope. We thought the rift was stable, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. But Evan's disappearance proved otherwise. Lena exhaled slowly. And now the watch has returned. The signal is active again. Yes, Nathaniel said, and with it comes danger. The room felt colder as Lena absorbed the weight of his words. She thought of Evan, lost in a place beyond time and now back, but fragmented. The watch was more than an artifact. It was a bridge between worlds. Who else knows about this? She asked. Nathaniel's gaze darkened. Government agencies, private organizations, some have been monitoring the rift for years, waiting for the right moment to act. Lena's mind raced. They'll come for Evan. Exactly, Nathaniel said, and for the watch. Lena returned to town, her thoughts heavy. She contacted old friends in law enforcement, warning them to stay alert. The quiet streets of Silver Ridge suddenly felt vulnerable, as if shadows stretched longer than they should. Evan remained guarded, speaking little. But one evening, he confided in Lena. They're watching me, he said, waiting for the next pulse, the next opening. Lena nodded. We need to prepare. As New Year's Eve approached, the town braced itself. Rumors spread quietly about the boy who vanished and returned, about strange occurrences near the clock tower, about time slipping. At midnight, the watch pulsed again. A steady, deep rhythm that resonated through the town. The clock tower chimed in response, gears grinding to life after years of silence. Lena, Nathaniel, and Evan gathered beneath the tower. The air thrummed with energy, and the boundaries between moments seemed to blur. We don't have much time, Nathaniel warned. The rift is growing. Evan looked at the watch. It's the only way to stop it. Lena's heart pounded. They faced a choice, hide the truth and protect the town, or expose the rift and risk everything. The fate of Silver Ridge rested in their hands. The days leading to New Year's Eve felt charged. Silver Ridge, usually calm and predictable, carried an edge in the air, as if the town itself was holding its breath. News had leaked. Strange lights near the tower. Reports of clocks running backward for seconds at a time. Murmurs of a time rift stirred whispers on every street corner. Lena and Nathaniel prepared quietly. They moved between old tomes and modern technology, trying to understand the precise moment the rift would reopen. The watch, ever pulsating in Evan's hand, served as their only guide. Evan himself was restless. The boy who had been trapped beyond time now stood on the precipice of its unraveling. It's coming, he said one evening. The convergence. The moment when everything overlaps. Lena pressed him for details. It's like all the timelines fold into one moment. The past, the present, the future collide. Nathaniel nodded grimly. That's when the rift is at its weakest. The gate swings wide. The town council, skeptical at first, had been briefed under tight secrecy. They reluctantly agreed to evacuate the immediate area around the clock tower on New Year's Eve. As night fell, the streets emptied, houses locked, families huddled inside, uneasy. At the square, Lena, Nathaniel, and Evan waited beneath the tower, eyes fixed upward. The mechanical heartbeat of the watch seemed to synchronize with the ancient gears above. Midnight approached. The old clock's hands hovered near 12. The air grew thick, charged with electricity. Then came the first chime, soft, distant. The gears groaned. The watch pulsed in Evan's palm. and the world shifted. Time fractured. The sky rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Shadows elongated, twisted, sounds warped, voices echoed out of order, laughter overlapping with cries. Lena gripped Evan's shoulder. "Stay with me." Nathaniel's device beeped wildly, tracking the pulse emanating from the rift. Suddenly, the clock tower began to spin, not mechanically, but in a blur of moments, flashing between years, decades, seconds. It was as if history itself was layered on top of itself. From the swirling mist, figures emerged. Not all human, shapes made of light and shadow. The convergence had opened the gate. Lena shouted to Evan, "You have to close it." He nodded, his fingers trembling over the watch face. The ancient gears inside the tower began to wind down. The pulse intensified. The air thickened. The town held in a moment suspended between times. Evan's voice cracked. "I'm going in." Without hesitation, he stepped forward. The world around them blurred, folding in on itself. Memories and moments collided. Lena reached out but could only grasp air. Inside the rift, Evan found himself surrounded by infinite corridors of time. Moments looping, intertwining, lives intersecting. He saw glimpses of the town's past, the faces of those long gone and shadows of futures yet to come. At the core, a glowing mechanism pulsed, the heart of the rift. It vibrated with power and pain. Evan raised the watch. The gears inside aligned, the symbols glowed brighter. He pushed against the flow, threading himself through the fractured moments. Back outside, Lena and Nathaniel felt the pressure ease. The distorted sounds softened. The figures faded. The clock tower slowed. And the gears stilled. Evan reappeared, breathless but alive. The rift had closed, but the victory was bittersweet. Evan looked at Lena, eyes filled with both relief and sorrow. "I closed the gate," he said, "but something stayed behind." Lena frowned. "What?" He shook his head. "I don't know yet, but it's watching." The watch's ticking slowed, then stopped. The town exhaled as if waking from a long and fitful dream. Silver Ridge's streets were eerily silent, the snow undisturbed beneath the pale glow of street lamps. Lena and Nathaniel led Evan away from the tower, but the air still felt stretched, thin, as if reality hadn't quite settled. Inside the old town hall, the three sat in near darkness, listening to the hollow tick of a regular wall clock. Evan stared at the antique watch, now motionless in his hands. Its face, usually bright with potential, seemed faded, drained by the ordeal. Nathaniel's voice broke the silence. "You did it. You closed the rift." Evan nodded, but his eyes never left the watch. "It was more than a door, it was a wall too. When I closed it, something inside me changed." Lena leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Evan's voice was thin, uncertain. "When I passed through, I saw it, the true shape of the rift. It's not just a tear in time. It's a barrier, a shield. And whatever it keeps out, it's not gone. It's waiting." Nathaniel shuddered. "Is it still here?" "I think it's inside the clock tower," Evan replied. "Locked away for now, but not forever." I felt it watching me as I closed the door. Not angry, just patient. A cold hush filled the room. Lena glanced at Nathaniel. "How long will the seal hold?" The old man looked grave. "As long as the mechanism remains undisturbed, but nothing lasts forever. Time itself is always shifting." Evan gripped the watch tighter. "It wanted me to come back, not to escape, but to make a choice. I could have stayed there, become part of the rift. It offered me a place outside of time, but I refused." Lena's voice was gentle. "Why did you come back?" He met her gaze, a flicker of a smile in his eyes. "Because I remembered who I was, and who was waiting for me." For a moment the heaviness lifted, but the truth was clear. Silver Ridge would never be the same. Later that night, Evan returned to the clearing with Lena. Snow whispered beneath their boots, the stone pillar looming tall. The symbols were dim, but still present, a reminder that the passage was only ever sleeping. Evan placed the watch on the stone. "I'm giving it back," he said softly. "This story isn't mine alone." Lena rested a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Evan turned away from the pillar, leaving the watch resting in the frost. He walked back toward town, a little older, a little heavier, but with hope burning quietly in his chest. But just as they reached the edge of the woods, the air shifted. A faint ticking, softer than breath, echoed behind them. The rift was closed, but the hour that never was had not truly ended. The dawn after the convergence was clear and sharp, the snow glittering beneath the awakening sun. Silver Ridge began to stir, its people unaware of how close their world had come to unraveling. Lena walked the quiet streets, her footsteps leaving crisp prints, the weight of recent days slowly lifting from her shoulders. In the heart of the town, the clock tower stood silent once more. Evan lingered at its base, staring up at the hands frozen at midnight, a reminder of the hour that nearly slipped away forever. Nathaniel joined him, a gentle hand resting on Evan's shoulder. "It's over for now," Nathaniel said quietly. Evan nodded. "But it's never really over, is it?" "No," Nathaniel replied, his eyes wise with years of waiting and watching. "But we have bought ourselves peace. Sometimes that's all anyone can do." Evan pressed his palm against the tower's cold stone, listening. The ticking was gone, utterly silent. The watch remained on the stone pillar in the woods, its power finally dormant, its secrets left undisturbed. For the first time since his return, Evan felt truly present. The past no longer called him back, and the future, though uncertain, no longer felt like a sentence. Lena watched him, a bittersweet pride filling her chest. She understood now that some wounds never close, but new beginnings can grow in their place. As the town woke, life resumed its gentle pace. Children built snowmen, neighbors exchanged morning greetings, and the stories of that night faded quietly into rumor and memory. The Marlowe's porch light stayed on a little longer, a sign of hope for those still searching for answers. Days later, Lena stood before the town museum, a small anonymous package in hand. She slipped inside and left the pocket watch, now still and harmless, in the care of the curator. There was no note, only a brass plaque that read, "Sometimes the seconds we lose hold the answers we seek." She stepped back outside, taking one last look at the tower before moving on. Evan, too, found a sense of peace. The questions would never fully end, but the need for answers no longer consumed him. With every passing day, he rediscovered his place among those who had waited, hoped, and believed. In the evenings, Lena and Evan would walk the town together, silent companions linked by a secret no one else could ever fully understand. Nathaniel faded back into his quiet life, content that his legacy had found resolution, if not perfection. Years from now, the legend of the vanished boy and the ringing watch would become the kind of story whispered at bedtime, a tale to make hearts race and imaginations soar. But for those who had lived it, it was a story about courage, sacrifice, and the quiet power of holding on. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting tales and mysterious journeys. And if you're ready for another unforgettable mystery, click on the next video now. Your next adventure is only a moment away.